My name is Kelly.
And my name is Will.
We are two Florida attorneys
Who love our 5 dogs.
and 2 cats.
And love listening to true crime.
Mainly me.
So I hope you enjoy our show as we delve into all things spooky.
This is For Crime's Sake. Good morning and happy Monday to everyone.
Or happy whatever day you listen to this episode.
Today, Lydia is making her first return to the studio, and with that, we have had every dog in for at least 2 episodes now.
It's a pretty momentous occasion for us.
It sure is.
So, Kelly, what is on the docket this week?
So, as you might remember, I signed us up for that run.
For our 1 mile fun run?
Our 1 mile fun run, which I know, guys, is not like that far, but I really wanted, like, I pictured us like breezing through it and everything, and it gets really hot in Florida, right? So it does. So
it is, and it's already really hot here.
It's already hot, so it's like one more week, it's going to be just sweltering. And so anyway, I need this week to at least run one other time so that it won't just be like the first run is that run. So I'm like, drenched in sweat, huffing and puffing at the finish line.
I think we'll be ready for the 1 mile fun run. We'll make it through.
What about you, Will?
So this week I'm going to do some fountain pen maintenance. I have something of a small collection of fountain pens. I'm a bit of an enthusiast, but I have ink in way too many of them right now, and I'm not writing with all of them every day. So I need to empty out a few of them and maybe flush them for storage. It's going to be a time.
Wow. So that is where we are at for the week.
Yes, it is.
In today's episode, we will be taking a closer look at the life and disappearance of Andrea Knable. And this is just a baffling case. It's been covered extensively by Discovery, with various documentaries and other podcasts, and for good reason.
This is one of those ones that you'll sit around and think about, and it'll just drive you nuts.
Yes, it is. It's a mystery. Really is a mystery. Sources for this episode include Uncover.com, Newsbreak.com, and Medium.com. Andrea Michelle Knable was born January 7th, 1982, in Louisville, Kentucky, and she was the oldest of 3 girls. And she was raised in Louisville, and she went on to attend the University of Louisville, where she earned a degree in social work.
And go Cardinals, go ACC.
After graduating from Louisville, she worked for several nonprofit organizations where she gained experience in advocacy and community outreach, which eventually led her to volunteer with Missing in America, where she worked tirelessly to bring closure to families of missing persons, which is tragically ironic.
It really, really is. And just to expand a little bit on Missing in America, so this was a group of mostly women. It was a group local to the Louisville area, and they were a volunteer organization dedicated to looking for missing people in the Louisville area. It was founded by a woman named Nancy Schaefer, and it's an interesting part of this story, one, because obviously it's something that Andrea was passionate about, and then she herself disappears, and there have been some conversations about how that could be relevant to her disappearance. But also within the group itself, there seems to have been some strange division, and following Andrea's disappearance, that division turned into straight up fracture, and the group started kind of pointing fingers at each other to some extent and fell apart and has never gotten back together. It's a really odd part of this story.
So during this time in her life, Andrea quickly gained a reputation as a hard worker and a big advocate for missing people. And she was also, besides that, a mother of 2 boys, and her family and friends remember her as being very loving with her children and having a very big heart.
So overall, sounds like a pretty lovely person who was committed to helping others.
Exactly. Unfortunately, around the summer of 2019, when Andrea was 37 years old, she had fallen on some hard times. She had recently been laid off from her job with Humana, and they had a bunch of budget cuts.
Yeah.
It was like thousands of workers were laid off.
I don't think it was a performance issue. It was just a layoff issue.
Yep. And then there was a hit and run accident, and she was without a vehicle.
Yeah, it was, I think they speculated it was like a snowplow maybe hit her car, and so there was like no recovery. So she was just stuck. She didn't have a car. Yeah,
so basically her car broke down on the side of the road. She left it in order to probably find help for it or something, and then when she came back for it,
a snowplow had just destroyed
something. It had been
probably
destroyed.
Probably a plow, but
yeah.
Really unlucky.
Yeah, no, it's really bad. And the situation also didn't help that she didn't have the means to get a new one. And around this time, Andrea had a roommate and was working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. But then her roommate moved out.
And suddenly her rent probably became unaffordable for just her and the kids.
Yes, and it forced her to have to move with her 2 children to her mother Cheryl's house. But at that time, her mom, Cheryl, was not actually residing there. The house was under construction and Cheryl's mom was staying elsewhere. But her sister, Sarah, so Andrea's sister, Sarah, and Sarah's fiance, Ethan, were living there. So that's who Andrea and her 2 boys moved in with.
And it's important to know the detail of who was where for this, because it will become relevant in this story.
Yes. So it's also important for the events that are about to unfold to note that Andrea had family members around her, like close, to her. For example, even though Cheryl wasn't living there with Sarah, Ethan, Andrea, and her 2 boys, she was close enough to have dinner at that house almost every other night.
So she was seeing the family pretty regularly.
Exactly. And Andrea's other sister, Erin, also lived nearby, about a mile or so from Cheryl's house. And Andrea, things were really tough. And unfortunately, it seems that she had gotten involved in selling methamphetamine, possibly getting involved in some sort of drug trade. I don't think this was on necessarily a large scale, but that there was some involvement with that. And she also, it seems by a lot of reports, that she began using methamphetamine herself. And this was a hard time and honestly would be a big cause for speculation later on what happened to her. So that brings us to the night of August 12th, 2019. So this night, Cheryl brought Chinese food to her home to eat with her family. And just to note that Andrea's sons were with their fathers that night, so they weren't in the home for any of this.
Oh, thank God. Maybe. I mean, we don't really know what happened, but yeah.
Yeah. So sometime that evening, Cheryl started a tough love conversation with Andrea. And this conversation was basically, telling Andrea that she disagreed with a lot of her recent life choices and how she was handling those things. And from what I understand, Sarah also was involved in this conversation.
And there has been some discrepancy in how this conversation started. Some sources say that it's Sarah who sort of initiated this. Others say that Cheryl started it and then Sarah kind of piled on, and that kind of made the whole thing worse. So it's unclear how this exactly started, but it was either Cheryl or Sarah, and whatever it was, Andrea did not walk away feeling good about this.
Yes, and I think the thing to note is that it was both Sarah and Cheryl at some point having this discussion with Andrea. Andrea was understandably agitated, and this, they were basically offering critical opinions of, as to her life choices.
And that's a tough thing.
That is, absolutely.
It's hard to just sit there and listen to people you love and care about say, hey, we think you're doing a bad job at stuff.
Exactly. And at some point that evening, Andrea decided to go to McDonald's with her nephew and Ethan, Sarah's fiance. And somehow during this, and I think it had been going on that day, but Andrea had developed some kind of face rash during that time. And Ethan drove her to Kentucky One Medical Center for treatment. And apparently he just left her there.
And what a weird little string of events that they have this thing where they're fighting at the house, then she leaves and goes with Ethan and her nephew to McDonald's, and then goes to get treatment for this rash at night, and he just leaves her there. The whole thing about that is weird. I don't get that.
Well, maybe Ethan wasn't a part of the conversation and she wanted to get out of the house, kind of have a cool down, and who knows? It's family. You tend to you tend to forgive family, I feel like, a lot easier than if it was like a random person off the street telling you you're doing a bad job. Like if it's your family, you're like, okay, I might be mad at you, but I'm not,
Fair enough.
It's your family.
Fair enough.
So, and this was around 9:50 p.m. on August 12th that he dropped her off at Kentucky One.
Okay.
So Andrea was treated and discharged around 11 p.m. And she, because she'd been left there, ended up taking a lift back to her mom's house. And this next part is just bizarre. Unfortunately and inexplicably, Andrea didn't have a key to the house.
Which, how odd is that? This is her mom's house.
Yes.
And she's also living there with her two young sons.
Yes. And so after being discharged from the hospital, she ends up getting back to this house that she now doesn't have a key to. And Sarah and Ethan were not answering the door. So Andrea could not get inside this house now. And so at this point, she decides to walk the mile or so to her sister Erin's house.
Okay.
Erin invited Andrea in because obviously at this point, Andrea is still upset about the conversation with her mom and Sarah earlier.
Thank God. Let me just say her sister was a mile and a half away and she could get there, because otherwise she's standing outside at 11 p.m. with nowhere to go, no car, no key to her house. And geez. Thankfully she had family around.
Yeah. And, Erin did try to console her and then eventually ended up driving Andrea back to their mom's house. But as I'm going to just make sure, it's not the house that the mom's actually currently staying at. It's the one where Sarah and Ethan are residing with her and her boys. So this drive is still bizarre, though, because Andrea still didn't have a key to the house. And it seems that Erin just left her there and then drove herself back home.
How weird is that? Why? It's not like she's so far away that she can't wait 3 minutes to make sure that Andrea gets safely in the house.
I don't know. And I think it was,
I don't think that was anything nefarious.
Yeah, I just think
it's just weird.
So eventually, around 1:34 a.m., Andrea walks back to Erin's house because, again, she was left out front without a key in the same situation she had just been.
For the second time that night.
And she, again, shows up to Aaron's house and at this point asks if she could just sleep there for the night. But Aaron said no in an effort to enforce, boundaries with her sister, as well as having her kids asleep downstairs, because Aaron's house also was under construction.
A lot of construction going on around here.
There's a lot. Yeah, I know.
They're all really reinvesting in their homes.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, no, it is. So after that, it seems Andrea walked back to her mom's house, and cell phone data tells us that she arrived back at her mother's house at 1:54 a.m. And before that, Aaron reported that Andrea stood outside her house scrolling through her phone, but she seemed more composed.
So, Aaron turns her down and says, no, you can't stay here. You can't sleep here tonight. And Andrea just kind of hung outside Aaron's house for a little while, calming down a little bit, and playing on her phone or talking on her phone or something until walking back.
Yes.
Okay.
And there is some confusion as to what happened next, because Sarah and Ethan have given conflicting statements, it seems, or at least, at the very least, something was misunderstood. Originally, it was believed that Andrea couldn't get back into the house at that point because Sarah and Ethan were sleeping. And that was their first story.
Right.
But when they were re-interviewed at some time later, they said they were awake, but didn't want to let Andrea inside because they feared she was still too upset from dinner.
And that is a pretty big discrepancy, and also deals with the initial question of if Andrea was standing outside the house, banging on the door, trying to get them to let her in, could they really have just slept through that? Or, it would make more sense that this was a willful choice, but why didn't they say that the first time?
Yes. And this all just adds to some of the mystery surrounding this. The activity from Andrea's cell phone continued, though, at her mother's house until it pinged 2 final times by her mother's house before the battery died, or the phone was turned off. Once at 3:53 a.m. and once at 6:31 a.m.
So we know that she was, or at least her phone was outside of that house until 6:31 a.m.
Yes, because Andrea Knable was never seen again. So when Andrea didn't show up or respond to family the next day, they weren't immediately concerned or anything, because apparently this wasn't completely atypical behavior. But then several more days passed, and her loved ones then started to get pretty concerned.
Understandably so.
On August 17th, 4 days after anyone had seen or heard from Andrea, Andrea's sister Erin filed a missing persons report.
And that's tough. Losing those 4 days is not helpful in this investigation.
No, and it's really sad because she had so many people, family members around her, and the fact that it was 4 days before she was reported is,
It's hard. It's a hard thing.
Police have investigated Andrea's disappearance, but unfortunately, they have very little to go on. Apparently, there were security cameras around. It's unclear exactly where, but they weren't active on that night because, sure, why would security cameras that have literally one job not be working?
Of course, the only thing they're supposed to do, and the one time they would come in handy, they're not running.
Never. Because of that, though, the only real information police have is that Andrea's phone was around her mom's house until after 6 a.m. It has been suggested by observers that Sarah and Ethan were suspicious because people find it odd that they wouldn't have heard Andrea knocking to let her in.
And I'm with those people. I don't buy that for a second. I don't think somebody knocking at the door, trying to get inside the house at 11:30 and then again at 2 a.m., that they just wouldn't hear that.
But this obviously would be explained by the revelation that they were awake and just chose not to let her in, like they said in the second time that they spoke with
their subsequent story that's different would fix that problem.
Over the last several years, there have been numerous sightings of Andrea, alleged sightings. But none of those tips have ever led to any information as to her whereabouts, and people close to Andrea are all of the opinion that Andrea would never leave her sons behind. There was also some buzz at the beginning of this year, 2023, when some human remains were found in Boyle County, Kentucky, but it was later determined that the bones were too old and could not have been the remains of Andrea Knable. So where does that leave us as far as theories go?
Well, unfortunately, it leaves us with a lot of theories. And, of course, the first one is that maybe Andrea left under her own power, either looking to end her life or abandon her current life and start a new one.
So this one doesn't really hold a lot of water, in my opinion. Andrea, I mean, I know this can be said about a lot of, situations and cases, but Andrea was a devoted mother and loved her two boys. She had two young sons. And it seems though, even though she was going through a tough time, she hadn't given up on things.
No.
She was fighting through it.
And there's no evidence to suggest
exactly.
that. Where did she go?
What method?
In the wee hours of the morning, she just disappears and nobody ever finds a trace of where she went?
That's the thing. I feel like if it was suicide, nothing was found to substantiate that. And if it was, she left voluntarily, just left her life, there was nothing ever to support that. And
yeah, it just
doesn't seem to.
I understand why it's a theory that has to be considered, but it's a theory that I don't think offers much.
No, and I think the problem with this case in general is that there's not a lot to go on, so it's hard to eliminate any option.
That's it. We want to say, that's a no-go, but we can't actually eliminate it. We can just say, it doesn't seem likely. But it is still possible. The next theory that, is plausible is that she randomly met with foul play that night. And
to me, I don't know. I know random abductions and murder, and that would explain, to me, honestly, I guess that would explain why nothing was really found, because if it was a random abduction, then there wouldn't be any link to that person. It'd be so attenuated that it would be hard to find.
That's true.
Happened. But at the same time, I just think it's pretty unlikely. So statistically, I just don't think that would be.
That's the thing. And it's exactly that. Statistically, she's standing outside. She happens to be outside at 6 o'clock in the morning, and someone who wants to kidnap and, do something bad to a person just happens to come by.
The next theory would be that someone she knew was involved in her disappearance. And as we previously mentioned, Andrea was going through a hard time and was selling and or using methamphetamine, and that it could be someone associated with that lifestyle.
Which, of course, if she was in the middle of that world, that does increase danger,
Absolutely. The thing is, though, that I'd be curious about was the police obviously can find out what was on her phone, even though her phone doesn't seem to have been found, that they could still see the phone records and stuff. So
they can get the data from the carrier.
Yes.
This wasn't 1995. This is 2019. So yeah.
So they should be able to see what her last communication was. And I don't know if for certain people, if there was a WhatsApp or
something that would some kind of encrypted messenger or something that deletes the message.
And then that would be hard to show who she was actually communicating with all the time. But they should be able to see what the last communication was.
I think that leads into a good point, though, and something worth noting is that this is not a cold case. This was 2019, It's 2023, so this is not like are some of our other cases that have gone cold and we have all of the information about the police investigation. The police are, according to them, still investigating. The Louisville Metro Police is still investigating this case, so we don't know everything that they know. We just know what we know, and we can speculate what they know. So just something important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of this at this point, unfortunately, is speculation.
Because it's all we have.
It's all we have. Yep. And then a theory I saw floating around a lot online was that Sarah and Ethan were involved.
And that's the sister who was living with her and her fiance. And
I think part of this is definitely due to the fact that Andrea was outside the house, and the house she and her sons were living at as well, and was not being permitted inside to stay, and instead was walking to the mile, a little over a mile, to her sister Erin's house in the middle of the night, and then
back and forth,
and this has led to a lot of speculation to their involvement. And also, the conflicting stories.
Yeah,
the change of their stories and accounts for that night obviously didn't help that situation as well.
No, and I think specifically the part of what changed is so important, because if they were asleep, it doesn't make sense that Andrea was knocking on the door and they just didn't hear her. But when they get re-interviewed, by that point, that problem is cured if they were awake and just willfully chose to ignore it and not let her in.
Yeah, and that second story is pretty, and not that it couldn't be true, but it's very self-serving, right? It's like, we're not letting her in because of her. We're afraid of her. And it puts them in a situation where they were just afraid.
Exactly.
And so it takes away a lot of blame.
And I think you're spot on with the choice of words there. And I think you could almost say that second story, that change was only self-serving.
Exactly.
There was no other point for it.
Exactly. So, police, as we stated, have talked, to Sarah and Ethan, it seems like multiple times. They've never been officially named as suspects and were persons of interest. And actually, no one has,
yeah,
right?
There have been no suspects officially.
Yes, which is just so frustrating.
It's so frustrating, but it's, again, a side effect of just the lack of evidence in this case. There's just so little to go on.
I think the biggest things, for Sarah and Ethan also are that the phone was, so we have a ping, at, what was it,
It's like 3:50, I think.
It was like 3:50, and then again at
around
6:30 or so, like 6:31, and then it's at the same location.
Right, so we have to assume her phone was in that area until at least 6 a.m. and for hours she just stood out there doing nothing while Sarah and Ethan didn't let her inside.
That's the thing, right? And you would think if she had called someone else to come pick her up, possibly, or something like that,
the phone would have pinged somewhere else.
The phone would have pinged somewhere else, or
would have connected to another tower somewhere.
Or if she had, left the phone there, that it wouldn't have just pinged.
Right, exactly.
There would have been no use.
It wouldn't have been, exactly.
So it's interesting that is, such a gap in the time. And also, I'd heard, I'd seen in several of the sources that some neighbors possibly heard what sounded like construction going on from the house.
And that is super odd. And yeah, I mean, whatever sounds they heard, that's suspicious. That's suspicious.
If it was actually those type of sounds and it was actually coming from that house, that is concerning.
Yes,
because who does? I mean, I know the house was under construction, but I mean, who does that in the middle of the night? I mean, that's bizarre.
Yeah, and also interesting just anecdote about Sarah and Ethan. At one point, following a long time after, I say a long time, but a while after Andrea first disappeared, police tried to re-interview Sarah alone without Ethan. They went to her home in Lexington and they met with her, and during that meeting, Ethan came home from work and when he saw them there, got very angry, it was described as he kept it under control, but told them to get out of his house and that he didn't want them there. And that's the last communication we're aware of between them and law enforcement.
And they did move also in the weeks following Andrea's disappearance.
They did.
I mean, granted, I don't think that was ever that the mom's house was ever going to be a permanent residence, but they did move further away, it seems, following Andrea's disappearance. And I don't know. I don't really like to point fingers because, let's just say, they're not involved. They're victims. The thing is, then we have someone who just lost her sister after, having a difficult relationship with her. And that's got to be devastating. So if obviously they're not involved, this is tragic for them that this has been this suspicion following them and that they've lived under this now. But
they are suspicious.
And I can only speak to myself and to my relationships with my siblings. I have two younger brothers, and I can tell you 100% if one of my brothers went missing, I would never not take part in searches. That it seems to be that they haven't really taken part in searches or doing that. I would have offered all the help. I would have taken polygraphs, even though everyone was like, don't take polygraphs. I would do so many things that I would never advise clients to do because my focus would be so just singularly focused on getting them and finding them and having me eliminated in any way and doing everything I could to bring them home safely because that would be my primary concern.
Yeah, and I think that even if you discount every other thing that we've said about Sarah and Ethan, every other point of potential suspicion, just the sheer fact that they have not seemingly participated in any effort whatsoever to find her is odd.
No, absolutely. And the thing is to want the police out of your house. Like, I know we've even talked about it. If someone showed up, like police showed up and are like, there's a missing person, we want to search your house. And I would be like, okay, yeah, we're doing, they're doing a neighborhood sweep or something.
Yeah.
I would say, like, most of the time I tell people, obviously clients would be like, don't advise you to
consent to a search. It's not a good idea.
But I can tell you, personally, I'd be like, absolutely, because I want to bring these people home. I want these people to be found.
It's like, do what you got to do so you
exactly.
can find this person. Absolutely.
But obviously not everybody, and
No, and you have a right to say no if there's not a search warrant, all well and good, but it is odd when one of your two sisters disappears and you just leave and don't participate.
Exactly.
And then a final theory that is worth talking about because of the nature of her work with Missing in America is that she was potentially caught up in some kind of human trafficking or something to do potentially with a cartel. And the reason this sort of comes up as a theory, I don't know how good of a theory it is, but it comes up because there was a particular case that Missing in America was working on. And at some point, a good bit prior to this, a couple years prior to this, Andrea had been talking about going undercover to try and find more information and get more, figure out what happened in that particular case she was working on. And there was a lot of conversation that maybe doing that was really dangerous, and that was a really dangerous case. And somehow what happened to her in 2019 could be related to that. For me, it's not a strong theory. I don't really have much reason to buy into that.
No, because we're saying then that these people just happened to basically stumble upon her while she was outside the house. I mean, that's just... I don't know. I mean, there's nothing to, as we keep saying, there's nothing to say that didn't happen, but there's nothing to substantiate it. And I just think if there would be something, there would have been some sort of clue, but, who knows? It's really hard to discount this one.
It is. And the level of concern from the Missing in America members who were involved and knew about that case, it shows you that they were afraid of that. They were, whatever was going on there, they were genuinely scared. But yeah, the idea that they were either just like that lucky in kidnapping and harming her, or they were kind of laying in wait, watching her for years. It's pretty outlandish.
And also, I mean, she's not really in the demographic with that. I mean, not saying that women that are 37 don't get abducted and
they
taken
do.
into, are can't be victims of human trafficking, but it isn't as likely. And I mean,
it's much less common than much younger girls. That's generally who they're targeting.
Yep.
Yeah. So that one, kind of a non-starter, worth mentioning, but yeah, nowhere really to go with that one, I don't think.
And unfortunately, that is all we have so far on the disappearance of Andrea Knable. Andrea's family and friends have described her as a kind, loving, and generous person. They say that she always put others before herself and would go out of her way to help those in need. Her work with Missing in America was just one example of her passion for helping others. Andrea Knable is described as a Caucasian woman, 5 foot, 7 inches tall, and weighing around 180 pounds when she was last seen on August 13th, 2019. Andrea was 37 years old and would be 41 years old today. She has brown hair and hazel eyes, and both of her ears are pierced. She was last known to be wearing a light-colored tank top, white shorts, and light-colored Nike shoes. Anyone with information on the whereabouts of Andrea Knable are asked to contact the Louisville Metro Police Department at 502-574-7111 or the Clarksville Police Department at 812-288-7151. And we have posted pictures from this case on our social media and our website at forcrimesake.com. And you'll see in these pictures, Andrea was just absolutely beautiful, and her smile was just infectious. You could tell, and I really hope that, her friends and family and everyone gets the answers that they are looking for, and we, get some answers to what happened to Andrea on the night of August 12th.
Absolutely. And try and get the word out, guys. Share this episode, share the story, talk to somebody you know about it. Just get the information out there, because if this case is going to be solved, it'll be from somebody coming forward with some information.
So Lids she did all right. She did pretty well. She's
always a little nervous.
She's always nervous no matter what. So, yeah, we adopted her a couple years ago at this point, right? It was about 1.5 years, I guess. And she's doing better than she was. I mean, she's an older dog, and we adopted her when she was old. Yes. So it's taken her a while to adjust, and she's great, but she is very nervous. So she gets really scared sometimes and just shakes, but I think she enjoys it. She loves having this one-on-one time and feeling very special, and
she's done well today.
She has. She's a very sweet little lady.
And if you guys liked this episode, please rate it, give us 5 stars, talk to us on social media, let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, let us know what you want to hear next. And
any case suggestions we appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're always happy to take them.
And until next Monday, guys.